In the early 2000s, I learned of a Bujinkan instructor in New York that had spent 15 years studying in Japan under Hatsumi Sensei. And he was a hard trainer, apparently. He had been a former shoot fighter. He had studied Kosen Judo, a style of judo that I was always interested in but never had access to because it was taught only in small training groups and universities in Japan. But this really prompted me to travel up north about 2 hours from where I live and meet this instructor and to do some training there. And I was privileged to have been able to travel and spend 3 weekends with Sean Askew. Since then, I've pursued my training. I've gone forward and studied with my teacher and committed my entire life to this path. But my experience back in 2000, 2001, training at Sean's dojo, left a huge impression. His style of teaching, his methodology of training was incredibly influential to me. Not only do we have a lot of shared past, but we also have a shared teacher. He was one of Manaka Sensei's students. We talk about that in this conversation. But I also have a deep appreciation for what he's brought to the community of our collective martial art in terms of his pursuit of truth and a deeper understanding of the history and the complexities to his teacher's teacher and even further back to the origins of the traditions that we study in this art. Now, if you're not a student of the Bujinkan or the Jininkan or any of the offshoots of what Takamatsu Sensei taught, this episode is still going to have some interest for you if you have any interest in traditional Japanese martial arts or any touch point at all, whether it was as a child or as an adult, with the arts that stem from ninjutsu. We go into some detail about ninjutsu. We talk about the current state of research. We talk about the myths. We talk about the misunderstandings and many of the truths surrounding ninjutsu and who those people were and what that means to us and what value it holds in our current martial art and how we should be understanding it. We talk about Nin-po. We talk about the higher orders and the pathways of this study. We don't go into deep detail on purpose. That can all be found in his book, Hidden Lineage, The Ninja of the Toda Clan. This is an academic book, and to me, every page meant stopping for about 15 minutes and really understanding what Sean was teaching. This isn't a book on technique. It's a book on history. It's a book on spirit. And it's mandatory reading if you have an interest in this art. Now, I could introduce Sean and read his bio, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that in the description because there's so much behind this martial artist. So I'll leave that up to you. Right now, let's get started with this conversation between myself and my friend Sean Askew.
Welcome to Shugyo, reflections on the path to self-mastery and forging the way. My name is Adam Mitchell. I'm your host and fellow student along this path.
All right, Sean, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode. This is going to be a really important, I believe, a meaningful conversation, but I hope to make it also fun and very valuable for all the listeners out there. But before anything, I want to congratulate you on your recent Menkyo Kaiden in Kotoryu Koppujitsu. And I'd like to just say, man, so well deserved. I've been watching your work for decades now, and I just couldn't think of anyone who is more deserving of it from what I can see from the periphery than yourself. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. That means a lot to me coming from you. I appreciate that. I've been watching you for a long time as well. I love watching your site and your videos. It's excellent. But
Thank
we
you.
come from the same source. Manaka Sensei is a great teacher.
Yeah, he sure is. One of the things I would like to do is I'd like to unpack a couple things here, and I think you and I can have a really honest discussion. I'd like to tunnel into some of the historical aspects of ninjutsu, and specifically the ninjutsu as it says is taught through Takamatsu Sensei and his grandfather Toda. And in this conversation, I want to go above your incredible book. I want to say that I can't. This is, as we were talking before I hit the record button. you really have to spend some time absorbing each page as you read it. It's one of those books. You haven't done a good job. You've done an incredible job
Thank you very
from
much.
my in this work, and it is so it's so rich. It's so thick with information and history. Uh, Anybody who wants to take this art seriously, this is sort of almost like mandatory reading. And it leads me to my first question, and I want to kind of step right in right here, which is with so much built, so much history that you've been able to say, hey, here it is, and so much information available. Why do you feel that there is so much pushback from different communities, from different, whether they be organizations, but so much pushback even from other researchers on the Togakure Ryu and ninjutsu?
I think it's because it takes the spotlight away from all of the other masters in Japan. I've got quite a good relationship with several Kenjutsu school Sokes and Daishihans from other Ryuha who are open-minded and are friendly toward the Bujinkan. But through them, I've gotten to realize that throughout the Kobudo world, ninjutsu is looked down upon in one sense. Um, for historical reasons, of course, on one side, but I think the big reason is that Hatsumi Sensei has stood out like a shooting star for the last couple decades, and it really kind of put a shadow over everybody else. Not meaning the other Shihan in our art, but a lot of other Kobudo martial arts do have a jealousy and a bit of a complex with the Bujinkan, just because we seem to globally suck up the students that they might be able to attract as well. I think ninjutsu is extremely popular, and the fantasy lets everybody's imagination run wild. And Soke and the Jinenkan as well. You know, the people, the high representatives of the art, have been searched out for the last few decades, and it doesn't seem to be going away either. Even as everything starts to. Yeah.
When
Sorry,
you
that.
say, yeah, when you say that it doesn't seem to be going away, where do you see this tracking? You know, when you have more researchers coming out, I really believe that there were three phases, and I talk about this in one of my coming episodes, where I'm trying to encourage more of a seriousness in training, more physicality, more
Mhm.
understanding that the kata in what we study,
Right,
it demands physicality. It
right,
demands your ability to track the knees correctly, not hyperextend the joints, make sure that weight distribution is correct, make sure that you know how to hit the mat, make sure you know how to get simple things like, you know how to get tapped out, and you're not just sitting there barking commands and
right,
making things up as you go along.
right.
And I find that there were really these three phases. I'd be interested to hear your feedback on this, which is first, you know, after the ninja boom, we had pay-per-view, and we had UFC come on the
Mhm.
scene. We
Right.
had pay-per-view fighting.
Yeah.
And now you could actually see anybody got called into the ring. Hey, you wanted to test your skills, come into the ring.
Right.
And then the second round was you know, was the internet. And now you started to see Budo, you started to see chat forums and discussion forums. And now no longer did you witness this fighting and you started to question, but now you could actually participate in the conversation, or at least you could sit on the bleachers and watch some very highly skilled and very learned people like yourself have conversations back and forth.
Mhm.
And now we get to this place where you have more of an open source environment like Gutenberg, or things like, you know, Eric Shahan's doing, where you're
Right.
finding these old, you know, books that just would have never seen the light of day,
Right.
let alone in the Western world, having them translated
Yeah.
through technology and through your own, you know, and through his own work. But so much information now is available that was never available before.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear where you see this tracking.
Mhm. Well, that's definitely the case. One thing I quickly realized when looking at Takamatsu Sensei's research was that there was no way that he could have made this up, because simply, like you said, with technology the way it is now, we have access to things that he wouldn't have had access to. To dig out the story would require you to get into national libraries, like things that just didn't exist at those times. You know, when Japan was still coming out of its feudal state, there was no places for Takamatsu Sensei as a young man to have gone to search these things out. it had to have been taught to him directly. Yeah. But like for me, I could take pieces of the stories that they've said and use I can use, for example, there's AI software out there now that is about 60 to 70% accurate, to where I could take an old document that I can't read myself, but let the AI read most of it for me. I'll get the gist of it, and then it's quite easy to start to decipher the rest of the document from there. Or becomes less expensive for me to take to a professional and have the rest of it translated. So yeah, everything now is at such a high pace. A couple of the people I work with in my research group, they're in Spain, and they don't even speak Japanese, but they come up with some of the best research that I've ever seen. They help me out tremendously, and it's simply because they're good researchers. They know how to use technology at the university academic level to dig things out and find it, even in other languages. It's absolutely amazing. We've got a great team. I'd like to give a shout out to those guys, the Bufu research group. Yeah.
Awesome. What do you see on the horizon then? Do you see sort of a slow emergence of more information centered around ninjutsu, centered around uh, Takamatsu Sensei? Do you see more of like a starburst moment where all of a sudden, boom, grave is found. All of a sudden, there's this massive treasure trove of information that becomes public.
Yeah. Yeah, I
What do
would
you
say
see?
we're really, really on the cusp of that. There's a few things that I haven't been back to Japan in a couple of years. I haven't been back since before COVID. But just before COVID hit, while I was there, I've been working with some researchers at the Iga University there, at Mie University on the Ninjutsu program. And through them, they've been able to assist me in locating the actual ruins of the Toda family. It's still there. They had what you would call kind of like a small estate, maybe even almost like a manor, right there in Iga. And the interesting part about that, which I don't want to give too much away because it'll come out in the second book, but um, I've been able to trace it that the owners, the people, the Toda family that lived on that plot all the way up into the 1870s, um, had maintained their estate there for 300 years or so. And when the 1870s came, late 1860s, early 1870s came, and the revolution happened, the Toda family moved from that location there in Iga to Kobe to open a dojo on the estate within the grounds of the Kuki property. So it's looking more and more like we're getting close to the actual locations of where the dojo was located. When the Toda family were working for the emperor, for the shogun, their position was in Edo, so they lived in Edo in the area of Musashino, and they kind of had a lot of power there. But their homeland was still in Iga, so when they retired, they had the option to go back and live home in Iga. But it seemed like for the last more than 100 years or so, the Toda family even remained in Edo after their deaths. So their graves are likely to be also found in Edo, near the Imperial Guard, probably near Zoshigaya, near Ikebukuro. I've been able to track down where their last properties were with falconry training, and their homes would have been probably on the same grounds.
Yeah, in your book, you talk about Kukitaka Hiro.
Yeah,
His eldest son,
yeah,
Takatomo, marries the daughter of
of
Toda
Toda.
Mitsune,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. There's more to that. There's as I've spoken about before, that lineage that we've been given in our history of the Toda, the eight generations of Toda. Those names don't exist. You'll never find them in any historical record. Um, but they are big clues. There are big clues and hints within those names to point out to who that real family is. And if you backtrack from Toda Hisajiro and go through those names through the Hisajiro's family, because his genealogy is available online. So it's a very proud samurai family, great history, but it's intertwined with espionage and falconry and ninjutsu. So it's a great story. Eventually, it should be turned into a movie. The Toda family themselves, generation after generation after generation, have been big heroes. Yeah, it's a great story to tell.
I'm wondering what your feeling is on this. I was having lunch with Manaka Sensei. Uh, this was last year. I was in Japan twice last year, going back next week. But I had lunch with him, and we were having this conversation about his experience and his time with Takamatsu
Yeah,
Sensei. He had made mention of a number of different experiences. And I asked him, based on a lot of the recent research, both inside the Bujinkan and outside, about what his feelings were on the the teaching of ninjutsu in the modern era, and now kind of after the 70s and the
Right.
80s and the 90s had passed, and he's gone on and done his own thing, and where he is now, closing in on 80. If he's to look back, how does he feel about this?
Right.
And his answer, he really didn't bat an eye or just even think about it. He said, I trusted Takamatsu
Oh,
Sensei.
right. Right.
And he didn't, I knew that there was this period in the early 70s that they had done a ton of research about
Yeah.
this, because they probably bumped up to some similar questions, maybe. I don't
Right.
know. But I know that there was a lot of research done, and he has written a lot himself, and he's given a lot to his students, which I'm sure you know of. But I really wanted to kind of get his viewpoint now, where things, as the years have gone by. And he went on to share about how there was this relationship that he had as a cadet in military academy, that Takamatsu sort of almost vicariously looked at him as on a path that he was not able to be on because of his own physical
Right.
handicap and not being able to get into the military. So that there was this sort of unique connection. And as a result, Manaka Sensei said, none of that matters to me. What matters is that I trusted
Right.
him. And I still today, I trust what he says. And I think, as a retired lieutenant colonel, a person who's pretty well-to-do guy, and I think you'd agree he's principally quite strong and a good judge of character. Should that be, as students of this art, regardless of organization, should that be more of our signpost, or should we be constantly digging into the history looking for this proof? How do you feel
Right.
about that?
Yeah, I do feel like there should be trust. But in order to do that, I think we need to have something out there. There should be
Yeah.
maybe one standard book or a website or an organization or something to like be a backbone. Yeah, with everything the way it is now, at least with the Bujinkan, the way everything now, it's kind of still like everything's just word of mouth. It's just kuden.
Yeah.
There's no way to especially when people start to challenge. If someone who's just say been in the art 10 even people who've been in this art 20 years, they could get caught up into a conversation with somebody who doubts the authenticity of our art and get all mumbled up just because they don't know how to defend the art. They don't know the history. They don't know. A lot of them don't even know the accusations that are being made against the Bujinkan. So it's quite an interesting mix of people out there, and some people just simply don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something interesting you said about how it couldn't have been made up. And this is something that I strongly agree with you on. I think that you have, with your study of this, with your research, you certainly have a lot more to stand on than I do. I, however, can look at something like the
Yeah.
Kotoryu, and I can look at the Shodan, the Chudan, the Oku. There's no way that you can go from uh, one set of principles and tactics in how we train. There's a strong emphasis around the sandan level of kakihiki. Like there's these tactics and how to really look at the kata in a very, very specific
Right.
way to be able to get a specific
Right.
response from your partner and from the opponent, and actually go from the uke to the teki. And there's this sort of whole kind of change and transformation of your intention as you move through the different
Right.
densho, and you realize the attacking characteristics that exist, or the sort of uh, the movements in one set of techniques versus another. This just can't be something that someone
Right.
made
Right.
up. This was ground
Right.
through from trial and error, through
Yeah.
experience, and people were constantly adding to this and
Right. Right.
optimizing it. And that is very, very clear. Would you feel that the only way to really get that is to do that type of training, to really research and go into the kata, into the individual densho, and then it almost becomes illuminating to a sense that you're like, no, this wasn't just
Right.
made up by
Right.
some guy who was lying. This is very, very
Yeah.
real, and the proof is right
Yeah.
here. How do you feel about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. There's one of the biggest things that came across to me when I was looking, especially delving into the kata, even at the level of say the Kukishinden, the Daken Taijutsu, a lot of the names of the katas, for example, kataho, it's those are actually technical terms that are involved that are related to naval warfare, the Cookie family's naval warfare, and there'd be no way that a normal individual. There's a whole. That's just one example, kataho, but within the whole Duha, there's all kinds of technical names that it belongs to the Navy. And there'd be talk about since it was never a sailor. It wasn't. He wouldn't have been able to have created these types of nuances and word the vocabulary. Same thing with like koku from the beginning of Gyokoryu. What often gets overlooked is koku is actually the name of a god of war. It's yeah, there's a if you don't. I think I did a Facebook post on it once. You might can Google it up pretty easily. But the depth that goes into each name of each form isn't something that could have been made up by one man in one generation. Like you said, this is something that's been built over a long period of time with a lot of depth. I mean, if it was one school,
Any,
I think, yeah, if it was one school, maybe some genius could have, a martial genius could have put it together and made it up. But we've got several schools with branches that just they intertwine so well. The families are so connected. That's not something he could have just created. He would have had to have had family lineages to have tied these in together and woven them together to match at the right time.
yeah. Man, that's a tough thing to be able to tell a researcher who's not part of the organization or maybe just had a couple of
Yeah,
touch points with it at some point
yeah,
in time. It's sort of like you just don't know what you
right,
don't
right,
know, and only those with eyes will see
yeah.
type thing.
Well, it's like even
So
with
it's
the
kind of
Japanese, if you with the Japanese researchers, one of the difficulties I've had with trying to get close with some of these people is because we start to say like the Gyokoryu, the founder of the Gyokoryu is Tozawa Hakunsai, and supposedly there's no evidence of him ever existing other than outside of the world of fiction. Um, but then a couple amazing things happened. Takamatsu Sensei places him in the lineage at the exact same time, within the same like 2 or 3 years, that the name of Tozawa, the family name Tozawa, actually ever came into existence. Right at the very beginning, and it was at the time of the Genpei Wars. So he placed Tozawa Hakunsai at the very very beginning of the Tozawa's family's lineage, but all of the fictional people who have written about him in novels, they place him into the middle of the Warring States period, fighting with and teaming up with what's his name there, Ishikawa Goemon and those other stories. So the academics start to say, well, he doesn't exist, but he exists in novels, so it has to be a later creation. And that went on for a long time, probably close to 50, 60 years within the Japanese academic community. They've been arguing back and forth as to whether or not there's even any written record of Tozawa Hakunsai existing. But I also wrote a post about this on Facebook. But a few years back, there was a samurai historian who was a samurai who wrote a massive work of art. It's probably like 6 feet by 6 feet. And it's a list of all the names of different grandmasters of different ryus. And this was written in the early 1800s. So it's long before the novels came out of uh, Ishikawa Goemon, Sandayu Momochi, and all these novels. So at least decades before that, there was a samurai researcher who did list Tozawa Hakunsai as the founder of Igaryu Ninjutsu. So pieces of the history are starting to now come out. Like people are, I think Japanese people themselves are starting to look. They're like, hey, what's in my attic, and especially the people who live in
yeah.
the countryside, and they're finding things, especially the Iga and Koga people. It's happening all the time with like the Watanabe family. Have you been following what's going on with the Watanabe family?
I have
Yeah,
been lately. Yeah,
they've come out with some great books. The one, even though the guy didn't realize he had a family history of ninjutsu, but he was a wealthy man, had a big estate, and they went into his kuda, and when they started digging around into some boxes, they found hundreds and hundreds of ninjutsu manuscripts from like the 1700s. Yeah, yeah. So a lot of
wow,
information is coming out.
amazing. Anybody who's been around your work has heard a term that you sort of, I guess, coined, but it's the
Yeah,
Momochi Den
yeah,
Taijutsu. And I've been waiting years to ask you this question. And I still have a document that you handed out at a workshop in 2001. I think we were talking before I hit
Yeah,
the record button. And I still have it. It's still in my binder. Like I'm wondering if you could. I think there's a very
yeah,
simple answer. It's just a collection
right.
of three different view. But I'm wondering if there's more to that drove you to batch those together and
Yeah,
actually sort of give it its
yeah.
own sort of
Okay,
bow and tie it up in its own
right.
package. Like, can you
Sure,
talk about
sure.
that a bit?
In '95, I was graduating from university in Tokyo. I went to Sophia University, and I had asked for Hatsumi Sensei for permission to write the paper and give me permission to interview him and things like that. So, over a course of time with talking to him, we didn't like saying Togakure Ryu, Gyoko Ryu, Koto Ryu over and over and over again. So it became a lot easier to say the Momochi Den. And then that led into further discussion with Hatsumi Sensei, and he explained to me that in the like when we go back and try to find the history of our art, we shouldn't expect to find documents that say Togakure Ryu or Kumogakure Ryu or anything like that, because during those periods of time, everything was Iga. Even Koga was Iga. Even up until like around 1600, they weren't really separated. They actually, it's a little earlier. Sorry, the only reason they got separated was because the Koga decided to follow the Ashikaga shogun, and Iga decided to stay loyal to the emperor. But um, so during that time, there was no such thing as Togakure Ryu or Gyoko Ryu or Koto Ryu or anything like that. They were all just warriors of Iga that followed the Iga way. But over time, of course, they have to talk about their own family. How did their own family get involved within Iga? And that's where these Ryuha names come from. So, like our strain of Iga would have been the Nishina's family's strain of it. Yeah, and according to their legends, Nishina was like the third or fourth Soke of Iga-ryu, while being the Soke of Togakure-ryu and such. So it follows along the same line as Ie Naga and all the other famous Iga warriors. But that's how Momochi Den came about. He and I discussed that, saying that you won't go into history and find Togakure-ryu, but what you can say is the arts that were practiced by the Momochi family. And here's some branches of the family that did it, and this was their specialty. This one branch of the family specialized in climbing and hiding in rivers and waiting on the bottom until something came above them to where they could sink it. Learning how to stay underwater for long periods of time. And, each school had its specialty. So when much later in time, and everybody wanted to look back, then those names started to come about. You start seeing other names, other like Yasuda Ryu and even Momochi Ryu or Fujita Ryu or yeah. A lot of the old
You,
names that we talk about, like Haku Unryu and the what's his name there, Kusunoki Ryu and the Yoshitsune. I tend to think that they don't really exist. They don't start to become mentioned until much later in history.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't come out. I don't know if you come out and say this, but I didn't get it from my read. But again, it's very, it's a thin
Yeah.
book. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a thin book, but for someone like me, it needs to be about this thick. There's, uh, but there is so much interwoven between the history of the Togakure Ryu
Oh
and the
yeah.
Kuki
Right.
family. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
so much overlap that
Yeah.
you go into. Is there any suggestion that uh, that this is the ninjutsu of the
Pretty
Kuki
much.
Shinryu?
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
Right.
I would say that they were the shinobi that would be hired out by the Cookie family. Yeah, at least at the very later end of their history, towards the 17, 1800s, that would be for sure. Earlier in history, I maybe not, because um, the early part of the say the Kotoryu begins where they're fighting in Izumo over at Iwami Ginzan, the silver mine. It was the world's third largest silver mine, I believe. So the Portuguese and everybody wanted to Japan to trade to get their silver. So the story for us begins in the Kotoryu. It begins over there. So at that time, I don't think they would have been connected. But uh, their job, they were sent from Iga to Izumo to retake that mine that had been taken away from the clan that held it. So they were hired out, got sent there. but Sakanoue, what's his name there? Sakanoue Kunitaro, that's his name. Sakanoue Kunitaro, the first, basically the first Soke of the Kotoryu, he dies in action there. And he passes it on, but his son, and I believe there's 3 Sakanoues that pass it on to each other, and they bring it back to Iga. So it left Iga, went to fight, and then came back to Iga. So after that point, it could have probably fell under the control of the Kuki family, especially when Iga fell. When Iga fell, the Toda family that we're connected to, this is actually an interesting part of the history. The Toda family that is our Soke lineage is involved in the invasion of Iga. Yeah.
Oh.
So they're in Iga, and they're also involved in the invasion of Iga. So whether or not the family saved their own to tell them, hey, the invasion's coming, and maybe they took off so that the other Toda family would invade and then come back, I'm not sure. That's a mystery at the moment, but yeah, they're definitely on both sides of the war.
As the information was coming out, I think a lot of people now in the periphery would say that there was a big, for example, that everything was Togakure Ryu, right? Because of
Right,
the
okay.
ninja boom. However, when I look at what
Right,
was
right.
happening from a different perspective, I see that there was this implementation of his teaching that shined a different light on ninjutsu, and it was more of a light of truth. Like, no, okay, there's all of this ninja fantasy over there, but this is what we're doing. And yes, this is happening at the same time that the entertainment and world is showing this stuff, but there's almost this sense of, like you said, sincerity and truthfulness to this. And I don't know if I'm explaining it really correctly here, but I I don't feel as though it is too much of a reach to say that a lot of the information that came out was it because of Doron and Steven coming in, Westerners starting to put ninjutsu on the radar. But I think that was something that really helped it not become very bastardized in a time when it could have. And it almost seemed like there was some genius behind what Hatsumi Sensei did by delivering it to the Western world in the way that it was done.
Right.
Because we're having this
Now I
conversation
get
now.
what you're saying. Yeah, I would have to say I agree with you 100%. Yeah, Soke is definitely a genius in that way. When you look at it over the last, the whole 50 years or so of the Bujinkan's history, he he planted the seeds and let the wind take them, and everything seems to be working out well for his plans. Everything he touches turns to gold. Yeah. I haven't seen anything that Sensei has ever put in, attempted to do that failed.
Yeah, I know one of the things we hear a lot in the Jininkan, Sean, is anytime I was at, when Sensei was living in Baltimore, there was an experience I had when he was teaching in just a small garage, and it was a February, and he comes in and he opens the windows. It's freezing. And we're training, class is over, and he asks, we done a 2-hour morning session, class is over. He asked if anybody had any questions, and there was only there was probably like six or 8 of us in the dojo. And one of the guests and one of the students had said, when you were training with Hatsumi, da 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 da, and he went in to ask his question, and Manaka Sensei just waved his hand, and he said, "Don't ever reference him as Hatsumi in my dojo. He is Hatsumi Sensei." Manaka Sensei got up and walked right out of the dojo. Didn't even finish the conversation. He was offended. I asked him about that some years later, and he said, "That's my teacher." And in his living room, he had a photo of Hatsumi Sensei on his mantelpiece in Baltimore. And there's this veneration or this acknowledgement of who Hatsumi Sensei was. And he would always say he was an enigma. Those were his words. He was an enigma. he
Yeah.
wasn't part of this world. I think he was. It was
Right.
once referenced, and this is why I really wanted to ask you this question, what your observation was, because I have no relationship there. I only have a relationship with Manaka Sensei. But hearing this talk makes me think that during this time, this very pivotal time of ninjutsu, it could have become something very, very different. And you started to see in the 1980s a lot of Westerners hijacking it and creating their own thing from it, and books being written by it.
Yeah.
And I like to think that while I'm sure it was profitable, it was certainly preserved as well. And it
Right.
sounds to me like you're agreeing with my very far and distant perspective of that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
Let's talk about what some of the current and common misconceptions of ninjutsu are, and we can I mean we can go from the how it's viewed from the Koryu community, right down to how it's viewed from sort of the lower level people who come in and think that they're going to get a quick certificate or whatever. But I'd like to run the spectrum of our collective martial arts community and hear from you what some of the misunderstandings are that we should really recalibrate.
Yeah. Well, the first one that we have to deal with is with the Koryu community, because the Bujinkan themselves, other than Soke, I've never seen Soke want to be considered part of the Kobudo Kai
Mm.
in Japan. He's there's a lot of rumors that have gone around that were talking about how he had to submit makimonos and denshos, and they were reviewed, and then they didn't predate 1860, so they were rejected, and he wasn't allowed to become a member of the Kobudo Kai. Blah 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 blah. When actually, none of that has ever happened. Ever, it never happened even once. It was started by people that followed the Draeger gentleman there, Don Draeger. It wasn't him himself. He was actually a friend of Soke's, but people that associated with Draeger were the ones that started this big story that because Soke didn't have any old documents, that everything was made up. Well, he's correct that there are no old documents for some of the Duha, but there are some very old documents for a lot of them. And then the biggest thing that I would like to say is when you're talking about ninjutsu, you can't expect to have the same type of densho menkyo kaiden type of system set up. It was completely different. Ninjutsu never existed as that type of formal system. There was no shoden, chuden, okuden, menkyos given out to shinobi. The only kind of if you want to call it a menkyo, the only thing that was ever given to shinobis, at least during the Edo period, where it was a certificate that comes from the shogun himself saying that you're working under him in his authority, and you only report to that certain chain of command, that you're outside of the rest of the Japanese chain of command. So everything is it's a secretive nature. So they can't expect us to have a shoden, chuden, okuden, menkyo, any kind of ranking system in ninjutsu. It just didn't exist. Not at least not until way past the golden era of ninjutsu. Maybe the 1800s. Those types of things started to come out. But yeah, you wouldn't see anything like that in the 1500s or the 1400s. The ninjas were too busy, actually doing work.
How did
And the art was always evolving. Like it wasn't something that like somebody
yeah
made up. It isn't like you could say this guy's the founder and this is the art, because ninjutsu is always something that just comes. It arises in the situation. When you're given a situation, it's going to have its weak points, and then you need to be the one to fill in those gaps, and that's where ninjutsu comes in. Whether or not you can use deception and falsehoods to let your enemy fall right into your trap.
how do we argue then for the preservation of ninjutsu?
Yeah, then I would say we do have a lot of things that, like a lot of our martial sayings. There's a lot of poems, like even within the Kotoryu Kaiden level itself. There's a bunch of poems that can be read. They have a lot of wisdom in there. Those type, I think we should be preserving especially the way Hatsumi Sensei has taught over these last. It's not the katas that we're really supposed to be trying to preserve. It's more of the, proper mental attitude, having students that are loyal. It's just the whole general, being a bushi, being a warrior properly. It didn't matter what yuhai you were from. You needed to be a good human being. And that's where I think our art can kind of get a kick in the rear. A lot of people have kind of, in my opinion, have started to just look too much into the kata side of things and forgot to polish their
Mhm.
character. The whole point of having that mirror up on the kamidana there is that it's supposed to represent your mind and your heart, and it needs to be polished. You got to keep that dust off. So training is our way of polishing our heart.
That's a really interesting point that I could unpack, and but I know it's beyond the scope of this conversation. It's something wow. Uh, I I wanted to hear your understanding of Ninpo and sort of
Ninpo.
that. It sounds to me that's sort of where that's kind of the lane we're merging onto right
Right,
now. But could
right.
you share with us a little bit about that definition and that higher meaning or that higher order and where we go
Right.
from the ninjutsu to that ninpo?
Okay. It's actually interesting you bring this up, but this is again a major part of my second book, the second part of Hidden Lineage. Um, when you search for the word Ninpo itself, it's especially as you get further back in time, it becomes more and more rare to find. Shinobi no Ho, Shinobi no Jutsu, a lot of ways of writing these, but Ninpo itself didn't really start to show up until Togakushi and Izuna.
Oh,
There's a valley between Togakushi and Mount Izuna. And that valley was filled with Shugenja back in the 1100s and all the way through the 1400s. The Nishina family there controlled the valley from Nishina Mountain to the bottom of the valley. And then Togakure from the bottom of the valley up to the top of Togakushi Mountain was controlled by, actually, I'm sorry, I forgot who it is at the moment. I would have to check my notes. But the Nishina family were powerful throughout the whole region, including Togakushi. But that whole mountainside was theirs. And from that area, you can find documents that that use the word Nin-po. And what it was a Shugenja type of magic ritual that you would perform for good luck, basically, to make you invisible, that you wouldn't be seen. It wasn't like you're going to do something and you just hope the guy doesn't see you type of thing. It was before you went out your door, before you started your mission, there was a ritual that you would do to pray for your invisibility. And then and it also included some objects that you would use in the ritual. I think it was 8 arrows. I believe 8 arrows have to be put into the cardinal directions with the arrowheads facing in, and they're all connected with a hemp rope, I believe. Something is placed in the middle, but this would be a ritual that they would go through to pray for their invisibility and a successful mission. Um, that was a very particular thing that was only done by the Nishina family in that area of the world of Japan. It wasn't something you found in other Shugenja or Shugendo rituals or Yamabushi rituals. It was only found on Izuna. Now, when our story, the Togakure Ryu legend, begins, the fall of Kiso Yoshinaka, the Nishina family have to flee and go to Iga. Okay, so when the Nishina family flees, obviously it wouldn't just be Nishina Daisuke; it would be the whole clan. The clan is lost, so the clan has to flee. So it was the clan that fled from Togakushi to Iga, and right after that period of time, so the 11-1200s. Well, another thing I should mention is when the Nishina clan does flee and they go to Iga, they settle in the area on the border of Iga and Nara, because Nara and Iga border up with each other. And that whole area there is loaded with, I think there's 13 shrines that are Togakushi shrines. It's another very rare thing. You don't find Togakushi shrines all throughout Japan. Here and there you'll find one or two, maybe one, usually one. You never find two. But here you find like 13 within 7 kilometers
there.
radius. So it's obvious that the Nishina settled there. Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of things in the legend that lend credibility to our story.
Wow. And you were saying the first that the
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but yeah, I forgot to tie in what I was saying was, so when the Nishina family fled and did go to Iga, they brought that ritual with them, and it spread throughout all of Iga and Koga. Because when you look at later documents like the 1400s, 1500s, 1670s, even the Bansen Shukai, you'll find that ritual So all of the shinobi of Iga and Koga started to incorporate it. So it's kind of like Izuna and Togakushi are the origins of Nin-po, which later developed into many more other rituals as well.
Wow, I'm looking forward to looking forward to the second work now. This is great. Let's, I want to be sensitive of time and some of the really important questions pertaining to the now. And again, like I shared with you earlier, I'm very interested in, as we don't get younger, I want to make sure that we are holding the lantern bright for the next generation behind us, and the young students, the new leadership. What, in your position, your opinion, your responsibility, should we be offering the next generation to focus more on? And you already shared, being a better character, focusing, you get so much focus and energy in the kata and learning this stuff, but you got to work on yourself. In
Right.
terms of in terms of maintaining proper study, proper training, preservation of the art, what are your what's your advice, Sean?
Yeah. My big thing is I push the Gogyo a lot, and sometimes it gets me into some trouble because when I go and I teach a seminar, I'll wind up teaching the Gogyo, but it's because they really need it. The even though someone might have a 7th degree black belt, you know how things are and how things got to be the way they are. So there's a lot of correction that needs to be done. So in order to preserve our art and solidify it for the next generation, I think everyone really needs to go back to the basics. They need to bend their knees. They need to, there's so much laziness, including myself. I get lazy too, but yeah, when you go to a seminar and you see a crowd of people and you say Chino Kata, sometimes it's like, okay, this is where we need to start. The feet aren't in the right place, the knees aren't. There's a lot of, and I know you know these things because Manaka Sensei, taught them to us. The the kihon is so important, and so many people are like, I'm ready to just fly through that. I've learned it once, I got it. Yeah, yeah. But it needs to be drilled. Every class should start with a kemi. It should start with Shoshin Gogyo. It should start with Atemi Tanden, hit the bag or hit a makiwara. I believe in all of that. Real training.
Yeah.
The basics, rather than, okay, I've been training 6 months and now I'm doing bojutsu. For the first year to 2 years, I really don't see much of anything other than Kion Happo and Ukemi at least for 2 years. Make sure they're doing it right.
And what do you?
That I think will help our future. When you look at other arts like karate and judo and aikido, they have a very formal and rugged structure for their basics, their kihon. It's not to say that they're locked to that. Like a great aikido master, of course, can break his forms and become a great martial artist. Same thing with the karate people. But it's their forms that get them there. Those great masters got there through the repetition of those forms that are the structure of their art. And with ours, we really need to instill that structure because a lot of people have gotten up to very high degrees without any structure.
Given its size, do you think that that's possible for the Bujinkan to actually implement that structure?
I think it has to die once.
Say what you mean by that.
Yeah, I don't know yet because it seems like everything's in limbo. To me, I feel like this is going to be the first time I say it in a public forum, but I do believe I see like a death coming with Soke's retirement. I think we're going to see something kind of wither and die off, and then from there, something's going to flower and bloom out of it. I don't know what that's going to be yet, though, but yeah, I think everything has to die once.
If you had your way, what would that look like?
I would incorporate tournaments and sparring. Yeah, I definitely. I believe that there's no reason that we can't do a jujitsu oriented or judo oriented with rules. I don't see. I don't like the excuses of my martial arts too dangerous or we can't use our techniques. That's not true at all. Your art should be just as powerful and as a BJJ guy. The art is the same. It's about how you train. And a match with rules is, if you can win, with a set of rules, then it's that much easier to win without them. When I am allowed to finger gouge and into the eyes or the groin or biting or anything like that, those are all just bonuses. But as a martial artist, you need a core. You can't go into a fight thinking I'm going to bite his throat off.
Yeah.
You need to know how to stop people from tackling you. You need to know how to stop somebody from grabbing you and repeatedly punching you in the face. I've had it happen to me. So you just reality starts to set in. So if I had my way, I would make a Togakushi Cup. I would even call it the Takamatsu Cup. Let everybody compete.
Wow. Make sure you give me.
I would do grappling rules, strike.
Yeah.
Make separate types of. You could do grappling only. You could do striking. You could even do weapons. There could be lots of fun involved too, especially shuriken. You could have great fun with shuriken tournaments.
Wow.
I brought this up with Soke one time, and he laughed and giggled, but he didn't seem to be up for it.
So, but what about going into cross training? What's your recommendation there? I spoke to Manaka Sensei. I think this was probably in 2001, somewhere around that same time, and that I went up and visited you, and I was talking to him about cross training, and he went through everybody in the room, and he said, "What do you like to do? What's your athletic like that?" And then when he came to me, he said, "Swimming and judo. Keep doing judo and swimming. Those are your two things.
Yes.
You don't need to do anything else. Swimming and judo."
Right.
Do you have a recommendation, or do you feel cross training has provided an important role in your own? I know you did Kosen judo. I'm a fan as well. Going to be actually doing some Kosen judo in Japan next week.
Nice.
And you also did when you were at university. You also were a shoot fighter. Is that correct?
Yeah. Actually, the shoot fighting started in '95, right the year I graduated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That was an interesting journey. When I asked Soke for permission to compete, he said, "Go for it. Just realize that it's a tool. It's not a way. It's not the path. It's just a tool." And that I wasn't allowed to use the Bujinkan name until I became a champion. If I became a champion, because if you become a champion, then you can tell everybody you're Bujinkan. So I had to keep the name Bujinkan out of it while I did it. But he had no problem with me doing it. Yeah.
Are there cross training models that you've seen in your own students that have been really successful that you've seen some super progress with?
Yeah, actually, Nate Daly was one of them. I was very proud of Nate. I always wanted Nate to compete in MMA because he got to a very high level, both in taijutsu and with newaza.
Great. And so how did he get there? What was his path?
We sparred a lot together.
Yeah.
We did a lot of sparring together when we were in New York, and then he went. After that, he went. I don't even know. Last I heard, he was in San Diego's, but I'm not sure if he's still there. But he continued. He's a bit of a genius, isn't he? He's one of those types of guy. I remember he was very young and still, he'd already started working for Lockheed Martin. His brain is just, wired a little bit differently. I don't even think he went to college or anything like that. He's just smarter than the professors.
Yeah,
so when he went to Japan, he became fluent in Japanese in less than a year. I was so jealous of that. I went to university to learn to speak the language. And then without any problem, with like less than a year staying there, he was fluent.
Wow. That was quite an experience. I said, before we hit the record button, and I'll say it again, I just want to thank you because the experience I had at your dojo really showed me that there were some very good teeth in this art. And, going up and working with your group, and then doing a half an hour of randori with you guys, I was like, all right, someone's getting down here. This is good. And it left a strong impression on me for all of the rest of my career. And whenever anybody asks me who some of my favorite teachers are in this art, who really stands out, you're always at the top of the list for sure.
Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we go, I want to ask Sean, are there any questions that really should be getting asked about our art right now? Are there any conversations that you would really encourage us to have more of?
Yeah, one would be maybe bringing everybody back in together. I don't know I don't know how to put this into the proper words. I don't think I could see say Bujinkan and the Genbukan getting along buddy buddy and being friendly. But I do see that the Jinenkan and the Bujinkan are brothers. There's nothing, and that's thanks to Manaka Sensei. He didn't do things in the wrong way. He did everything the right way. The situation. I was there. You were there. I was there when it was time for him to do his own thing and create the Jinenkan, and he did, and he didn't do it in an insulting way. He did it in a very peaceful and good way. So I could see in the future that I think Jinenkan and Bujinkan people should be working together more. I don't see any reason for us to think of each other as being apart. In my opinion, Manaka Sensei kept true to what the Bujinkan was always teaching. I think he just kept his students to a higher caliber. So I think the question we should be looking at is, in the future, we can't afford to be split up. This isn't going to be an art. In my opinion, I don't think this is going to be an art like judo or karate to where it's going to be for the masses. It'll still always be there with a good. I think there'll always be a large number of us throughout the world, but I don't see it as becoming like a McDonald's type of thing. It's going to always be a little bit underground and low key. So I would like to see everybody working together, getting along together, having seminars together, training together, writing together, working together. There's no reason. But like I said, I don't know if that could be possible with there's a few other branches that maybe that won't work.
Time will tell.
Yeah.
Time will tell. But, having conversations like this here with you, Sean, is certainly is a good starting point.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what part of that death and rebirth that I was talking about earlier, that I feel is coming and should come. That some of the things of the past are the past, and the future doesn't. It's really not that important. The future is important, of course, but those differences that were in the past are negligible.
Well, hopefully, a lot of people hear your words, because they're extremely important and carry a lot of weight for sure.
It's funny because I didn't feel that way before. Back. Well, that could be another whole conversation, so I probably shouldn't. But everyone changes. There was probably several years back where I wouldn't have been saying this, but looking at things from in hindsight, Manaka Sensei did things very well. He did things the right way.
Tell us, as we wind up here, a little bit about some of your current projects, what we can look forward to, and how we can support it, and what those steps look like.
Yeah, got a lot of going on, actually. I've been working on the second volume of Hidden Lineage back ever since the first one finished. It should have been finished a long time ago, but I'm waiting to get back to Japan. There's a lot of things that have been discovered that I want to be the first to get photos of to include in the book. So Hidden Lineage 2 will come out after I've gone back to Japan to get some final photos. I'm currently working on a project with Alex Esteve from Spain, the Daishihan from Spain. He's one of the other Meikyo Kaiden holders. We're working on a joint project together on the Koto Ryu and about Noguchi Sensei's life, and similar to the idea of what Ishizuka Sensei and Kasem have just done. Maybe a little bit different. Like I believe I saw some others, and I know they covered the Densho and things like that. I don't think we'll cover the Densho in this book. There's a lot of material that has never been released before, as far as I know, that Alex and I are now currently translating. So the bulk of the book will be the inner teachings of the Koto Ryu that most of us. I had never seen a lot of some of the stuff before. So that'll be an exciting book. I also
Is that going to be available to the public?
Yeah. This will be made open to everybody. Yeah. I would imagine right now the plan for Alex and I to finish that will be before the next Taikai. We want to have it presented in March at the Taikai for Noguchi Sensei. So I expect that book to come out at the end of February, beginning of March. And then in the meantime, I'm also working on, there's a book called the Gunzui Odoki, which right now, it's a major military text that is extremely rare. There's only 3 copies left that are known, and I've got one of them. It's a complete book. It's the Natori Ryu's I wouldn't call it a densho. It's more like a encyclopedia of anything related to their martial art. It's about a 300-page book written in the 1770s. And there's a whole chapter in there on ninjutsu called Shinobi no Maki. So I've had that professionally transliterated from the old Japanese into modern Japanese. And then I'm translating that into English. And the researchers in Japan that did that work for me also gave me a bulk of material that is how to understand, like there's things that are mentioned in the text that without this other supplementary notes you wouldn't be able to understand it. So we're going to include all of that in a book. So I think it'll be the first time you'll ever see an actual real Shinobi Densho completely translated from beginning to end in 3 stages. It'll be in the original Japanese, the old Kanbun, then it'll be in modern Japanese, and then in English.
You certainly have your plate filled, man.
Yeah, it's busy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's bringing so much for so many people too. I hope you recognize it. I mean, sometimes we do our work and we don't realize the impact that we're making, and it takes others to share that with us. And I just want to hopefully I can stand in that place and say that all of the work that you're doing, it's helping so many of us. And I just want to, share my gratitude.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Sean. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the friendship, the willingness to come on and spend your time here. I know it's late right now in the evening that we're doing this, and I appreciate that. How can anybody contact you if they have further questions or if they want to learn more about your work?
Oh yeah, I'm outspoken on Facebook. So if you ever want to get a hold of me, just type in Sean Askew in Facebook. Yeah. I generally respond to most people, unless you ask me some crazy wild question.
Right. Okay, well, Sean, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite.
Shugyo is brought to you by the Yasuragi Dojo, a traditional Japanese martial arts school and nonprofit 501c3 organization located in New York. I'm your host, Adam Mitchell, and I truly hope that you found some value and inspiration from this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about our dojo, yes, it's an actual physical dojo, not just some virtual one made up on the internet, find us on the web at yasuragidojo.com. The link is in the show notes. Or go ahead and access our free mobile app for iPhone and Android. There, you can access our daily training, coaching, live streams, meditations, workshops, and both online and in-person retreats. Our work depends on the generosity of our supporters, dedicated students around the world, and you by listening to this episode. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel, and you'll be updated on new episodes and reflections as they roll out. And if you know someone who will enjoy the conversation that we had today, please go ahead and share. Once again, my name is Adam. This is Shugyo. Until next time.